Captain Sarah Martinez had heard the whispers her entire military career. They followed her through the halls of Nellis Air Force Base like shadows she couldn't shake. She's only here because they need to fill quotas, some would say. A woman, flying attack missions? What's next? Others would mutter. At 32, Sarah had more flight hours in an A-10 Thunderbolt than most pilots twice her age. She'd earned her wings the hard way, pushing through flight school where instructors seemed to grade her papers twice as hard and expect her to be twice as perfect. But none of that mattered to the old boys' club that still ran much of the military. The morning briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-mission chatter when Sarah walked in. The talking stopped. 20 pairs of eyes followed her as she made her way to an empty seat near the back. She'd learned long ago to keep her head high and her expression neutral, even when her stomach twisted with frustration. Colonel James Reeves stood at the front of the room, his weathered face serious as he pointed to the large map displayed on the screen. "Gentlemen and lady," he said with a slight nod toward Sarah that felt more like an afterthought than respect. "We have a situation developing in the Nevada desert. A Navy SEAL team has gone silent during a training exercise." Sarah leaned forward, her attention sharpening. Search and rescue missions were what she lived for, the chance to bring someone's son, daughter, husband, or wife home safely. The SEALs were conducting a night infiltration exercise in Sector 7 when communications went dark approximately 6 hours ago, Colonel Reeves continued. Weather conditions deteriorated rapidly. We've got a dust storm moving through the DIN area, visibility near zero. Captain Mike Stevens, a pilot with half of Sarah's experience but twice the swagger, raised his hand. "Sir, what about the rescue helicopters? Seems like a job for the bird drivers." Colonel Reeves shook his head. "Conditions are too severe for helicopter operations. The dust storm is creating massive downdrafts and zero visibility. We need something that can handle rough weather and provide close air support if needed." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly the kind of mission the A-10 was built for. The aircraft was designed to operate in harsh conditions, to get low and dirty when other planes couldn't. But she kept quiet, knowing that speaking up would only draw more unwanted attention. "Martinez!" Colonel Reeves called out, and Sarah's heart jumped. "You'll take the lead on this one. Your aircraft is already prepped for extended operations." The room erupted in murmurs. Sarah heard Captain Stevens scoff behind her. "Sir, with all due respect," Stevens said, standing up, "shouldn't we send someone with more combat experience? This could turn into a real situation out there." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "I have over 2,000 hours in the A-10, Captain Stevens, 1,200 of those in combat zones. Flying air shows and training missions isn't the same as the real deal, sweetheart," Stevens shot back, emphasizing the last word like it was an insult. "That's enough," Colonel Reeves barked, but Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes, too. He was sending her because she was available, not because he believed in her abilities. As the briefing ended, Sarah gathered her charts and headed for the door. Stevens caught up with her in the hallway, his voice low but cutting. "Look, Martinez, nobody wants to see you fail out there. But those SEALs have families. Maybe let someone with more experience handle this one." Sarah stopped and turned to face him. "Captain Stevens, I earned my wings the same way you did. I passed the same tests, flew the same missions, and proved myself over and over again. The only difference between us is that I have to do it twice, as well to get half the credit." She walked away before he could respond, her boots echoing in the empty corridor. But his words stung because they echoed the doubts she'd been fighting her whole career. What if she wasn't good enough? What if her determination to prove herself put those SEALs in danger? An hour later, Sarah stood beside her A-10 on the flight, line running through her pre-flight checks. The aircraft was a beautiful, deadly machine, built like a tank that could fly, designed to take punishment and keep fighting. Its massive GAU-8 cannon could tear through enemy armor, but today she hoped she'd only need its sensors and communication equipment. Master Sergeant Tony Rodriguez, her crew chief, appeared at her elbow. Rodriguez had been working on A-10s longer than Sarah had been flying, and he was one of the few people on base who treated her with the respect she'd earned. "She's ready to fly, Captain," he said, patting the aircraft's armored belly. "Full fuel, full ammunition load just in case. Emergency medical supplies are loaded in the back." "Thanks, Tony. Weather update?" Rodriguez frowned, checking his tablet. "It's getting worse out there. Dust storm is intensifying, winds gusting up to 40 knots. Visibility dropping to near zero in some areas." Sarah nodded, her mind already working through the challenges ahead. Flying in a dust storm was dangerous enough, but finding a lost SEAL team in those conditions would push both her skills and her aircraft to their limits. "Captain Martinez?" A young airman ran up to them, slightly out of breath. "Sir, you have a message from the Rescue Coordination Center. They've lost all contact with the SEAL team. Last known position was approximately 30 miles northeast of here, near Devil's Canyon." Devil's Canyon. Sarah knew the area. It was rugged desert terrain, full of ravines and rocky outcroppings that could hide a team but also trap them if things went wrong. In a dust storm, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack while wearing a blindfold. As Sarah climbed into her cockpit, she could see other pilots and ground crew watching her. Some looked skeptical, others seemed genuinely concerned. A few were probably hoping she'd fail, just to prove their point about women in combat roles. She strapped herself in and began her startup procedures, the familiar routine calming her nerves. The A-10's twin engines spooled up with their characteristic high-pitched whine, and she could feel the aircraft coming alive around her. "Tower, this is Thunderbolt 27, requesting clearance for immediate departure," she radioed. "Thunderbolt 27? You're cleared for takeoff. Weather update shows deteriorating conditions at your destination. Recommend extreme caution." "Copy, Tower. 27 rolling." Sarah pushed the throttles forward and felt the A-10 surge down the runway. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, climbing into the clear desert sky. But ahead of her, she could see the massive wall of dust and sand that marked the edge of the storm system. As she flew toward the storm, Sarah thought about the SEAL team waiting somewhere in that chaos. They were counting on her to find them, to bring them home safely. She couldn't let them down, and she couldn't let the doubters win. But as the first wisps of dust began to streak past her canopy, Sarah realized that this mission would test everything. She'd learned about flying, about courage, and about proving herself in a world that questioned her every move. The storm swallowed her aircraft, and suddenly she was flying blind into the unknown, with only her instruments and her determination to guide her toward 8 missing warriors who needed her to be better than good enough. They needed her to be perfect. The dust hit Sarah's A-10 like a physical blow, turning her world into a swirling brown nightmare. Visibility dropped to 0 in seconds, and her aircraft began to shake as winds buffeted it from all directions. She gripped the stick tighter, fighting to maintain control as the storm tried to tear her from the sky. "Base, this is Thunderbolt 27, she radioed, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Entering the storm system now. Visibility 0, switching to instruments only." "Copy 27. "How are you handling the conditions?" Sarah didn't answer right away, too focused on keeping her aircraft level as a massive downdraft tried to slam her into the desert floor. The A-10's rugged design was the only thing keeping her alive. Any other aircraft would have been torn apart by now. 27 is managing, she finally replied, not wanting to admit how challenging the conditions really were. She could imagine Captain Stevens and the others listening to her radio calls, waiting for her to turn back. She pushed deeper into the storm, using her radar and GPS to navigate toward the SEAL's last known position. The dust was so thick it was like flying through chocolate pudding, and every few seconds her aircraft would hit an air pocket that dropped her 50 feet in an instant. 20 minutes into the flight, Sarah reached Devil's Canyon. She began a systematic search pattern, flying low and slow despite the dangerous conditions. Her eyes were glued to her instruments, looking for any sign of the missing team. Thunderbolt. 2-7, this is Rescue Base, her radio crackled. We're showing you at extremely low altitude. Recommend you climb to a safer height. Negative, Rescue Base. Can't find them from up high in these conditions. I need to stay low. She knew the risks, but she also knew that those SEALs were depending on her. If she played it safe and stayed high, they might die waiting for rescue. For another hour, Sarah crisscrossed the search area, her fuel gauge steadily dropping. The dust storm showed no signs of letting up, and she was beginning to worry that she might have to return to base empty-handed. Then her radio erupted with static, followed by a weak voice. Any station, this is SEAL Team 6. We have casualties and need immediate evacuation." Sarah's heart jumped. She'd found them. But the signal was so weak and distorted that she couldn't get a fix on their location. "SEAL Team 6, this is Air Force Thunderbolt 2-7. I'm in your area looking for you. Can you give me your position?" Thunderbolt. "Can barely. Hear you. We're trapped." Canyon wall collapsed. 2 men down. The signal faded into static. Sarah cursed under her breath and began flying an even tighter search pattern. Somewhere down there, 8 Navy SEALs were trapped and running out of time. She was so focused on her search that she almost didn't see the rocky ridge looming out of the dust directly ahead. Sarah yanked back on the stick, pulling the A-10 up just in time to clear the rocks by mere feet. Her heart was pounding as she realized how close she'd come to flying straight into the ground. "Get it together, Martinez," she muttered to herself. "Those guys are counting on you." She forced herself to be more careful, using her radar altimeter to maintain a safe distance from the ground while still staying low enough to search effectively. The dust storm was disorienting, making it feel like she was flying inside a washing machine. Another weak radio call broke through the static. "Thunderbolt. We see lights. Are you there?" Sarah looked down at her instrument panel. She had her navigation lights on, but they wouldn't be visible through the dust storm unless she was very close to the ground. That meant the SEALs were directly below her somewhere. "SEAL Team 6, if you can see my lights, I'm right above you. Can you signal your position?" She waited, scanning the ground through the swirling dust. Then she saw it. A brief flash of light, gone almost before she could register it. "I see your signal," she radioed. "Stand by." Sarah banked her aircraft around, trying to line up for another pass over the area where she'd seen the light. But as she turned, a massive gust of wind caught her A-10 and threw it sideways. She fought to regain control, but the aircraft was being tossed around like a toy. Suddenly, her left engine began to surge and backfire. Warning lights lit up her instrument panel like a Christmas tree. The dust storm was choking her engines, and she was rapidly losing power. "Mayday! Mayday!" she called over the radio. "Thunderbolt 2-7 declaring an emergency. Left engine failure, attempting to maintain flight." 2-7, this is base. Recommend immediate return for emergency landing." Sarah looked down at where she'd last seen the SEAL team's signal. If she left now, it might be hours before another aircraft could reach them, if one could reach them at all in these conditions. But if she stayed and her remaining engine failed, she'd crash and become another rescue problem. The decision took her less than a second. "Negative, base. I have visual contact with the survivors. Beginning rescue operations." 2-7, that's an order. "Return to base immediately." Sarah reached over and turned down her radio volume. She wasn't going to abandon those SEALs, no matter what the cost. She managed to get her aircraft stabilized on one engine and began another pass over the area. This time, she could make out shapes on the ground through the dust. Human figures huddled against a rock wall. "SEAL Team 6, this is Thunderbolt. I have visual contact. What's your situation down there?" "Thunderbolt, thank God," came the clearer response. "We're trapped against a canyon wall. Landslide blocked our exit route. We have 2 men with serious injuries, broken bones, possible internal bleeding. We can't move them without risking their lives." Sarah studied the terrain below. The canyon was narrow, with steep walls on both sides. There was no way a helicopter could land in there, even in good weather, but she might be able to do something else. "SEAL Team 6, I can't land in there, but I can call in a medical evacuation helicopter to a safer location. Can you move your injured to the mouth of the canyon? Negative, Thunderbolt. One of our men has a possible spinal injury. Moving him could paralyze or kill him. Sarah felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. The standard procedure would be to call for a rescue team to hike in and stabilize the injured seals before moving them. But that could take hours, and in a dust storm like this, hours might be too long. Her remaining engine coughed, reminding her that her own situation was becoming desperate. She had maybe 15 minutes of flight time left before she'd be forced to attempt an emergency landing in the desert. Then an idea formed in her mind. It was dangerous, probably crazy, but it might work. SEAL Team 6, I need you to clear an area about 50 feet long and 20 feet wide. Remove any rocks, debris, anything that could cause problems. Can you do that? Thunderbolt, what are you planning? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to attempt had never been done before, not in conditions like this. I'm coming down to get you. The radio was quiet for a long moment. Then the SEAL team leader's voice came back, filled with disbelief. Say again, Thunderbolt. Did you just say you're landing in the canyon? That's affirmative. It's the only way to get your injured out quickly. Start clearing that area. I'll be making my approach in 10 minutes. As Sarah began to set up for what might be the most dangerous landing attempt in Air Force history, she thought about all the people who had doubted her, who had said she didn't belong in the cockpit of a combat aircraft. In a few minutes, she'd either prove them all wrong or die trying. Sarah circled above the canyon, her one remaining engine sputtering intermittently as dust continued to choke its air intake. Through the swirling brown chaos, she could barely make out the SEAL team below, frantically clearing rocks and debris from a small patch of ground. This is insane, she muttered to herself, running through the calculations in her head. The cleared area was maybe 60 feet long, barely enough space for a normal landing, let alone one in a dust storm with a crippled aircraft. Her radio crackled to life. Thunderbolt 27, this is Colonel Reeves. What's your status? Sarah hesitated before answering. She knew that if she told the colonel what she was planning, he'd order her to abort immediately. 27 is evaluating rescue options, sir. Martinez, your engine telemetry shows critical failure. You need to return to base now. That's a direct order. Down in the canyon, she could see the SEALs still working to clear the makeshift landing strip. One figure lay motionless on a stretcher, the injured SEAL who couldn't be moved. Sir, I have 8 American servicemen trapped in a canyon with severe injuries. Weather conditions make helicopter rescue impossible. I'm their only option. Captain Martinez, you will return to base immediately. That's final. Sarah reached over and switched off her radio transmitter, keeping only the receiver active so she could hear the SEALs. She knew she was ending her military career with that action, but some things were more important than following orders. SEAL Team 6, how's that clearing coming? Almost done, Thunderbolt. But listen, this is crazy even by SEAL standards. Are you sure about this? Sarah looked at her fuel gauge, less than 10 minutes remaining. Her engine temperature was climbing into the red zone, and she could feel the aircraft getting harder to control as systems began to fail. Negative choice, SEAL Team 6. It's this or we all go home in body bags. She began her approach, dropping down into the canyon at an angle that would have been suicidal in any other aircraft. The A-10's robust design and excellent low-speed handling were the only things making this even remotely possible. The canyon walls flashed past her wingtips, so close she could have reached out and touched them. Dust and debris swirled around her aircraft as she descended, and for a moment she lost all visual reference, flying purely on instruments and instinct. Thunderbolt, you're coming in too fast, the SEAL leader called. Sarah could see the cleared area rushing up at her, looking impossibly small. She pulled back on the throttle, but her damaged engine responded sluggishly. The A-10 was still moving, too fast for the short strip. At the last second, she made a decision that went against every bit of training she'd ever received. Instead of trying to land normally, she pulled the aircraft into a steep climb, trading airspeed for altitude, then chopped the throttle completely and let the A-10 drop like a stone. The aircraft hit the ground hard, bouncing twice before settling. Sarah stood on the brakes, feeling them heat up as they fought to stop the heavy aircraft. The end of the cleared area rushed toward her, a wall of rock that would destroy the plane and probably kill her if she couldn't stop in time. The A-10 shuddered to a halt with less than 10 feet to spare. For a moment, Sarah just sat in her cockpit, hardly believing she was still alive. Then training took over, and she began shutting down her systems and preparing to evacuate the aircraft. SEAL Team 6, Thunderbolt is on the ground. Let's get your people loaded. She popped her canopy and climbed out, immediately hit by the full force of the dust storm. The wind was howling through the canyon, carrying sand that felt like being blasted with tiny needles. The SEAL team leader, a grizzled sergeant named Torres, ran up to her aircraft. "Ma'am, I've got to say, that was either the bravest or craziest thing I've ever seen." "Little bit of both, Sergeant. Where are your injured?" They worked quickly, loading the 2 wounded SEALs into the A-10's small cargo area behind the pilot's seat. It wasn't designed for medical evacuation, but Sarah had managed to fit a stretcher and basic medical supplies. "The rest of us can wait." "For another rescue," Torres said. "These 2 need immediate medical attention." Sarah shook her head. "We're all leaving together. This aircraft isn't taking off again. That landing fried what was left of my landing gear. But I've got a plan." She pulled out her emergency radio and switched to the guard frequency. Any station, this is Air Force Captain Martinez. I have 8 personnel requiring immediate evacuation from Devil's Canyon. My position is marked by an A-10 aircraft on the ground." The response came immediately. "Captain Martinez, this is Colonel Reeves. You were ordered to return to base. You're in serious trouble, young lady." "With all due respect, sir, court-martial." "Me later. Right now I need immediate rescue for 8 American servicemen. 2 critical." A different voice broke in. "Thunderbolt 2-7, this is Rescue 7-1. We're inbound to your position, ETA 15 minutes. How do you want to handle this?" Sarah looked up at the swirling dust storm. "Rescue 7-1, you can't land in this weather, but I've got an idea. Can you maintain hover about 100 feet above the canyon?" "That's pushing it in these conditions, but we can try." Sarah turned to Sergeant Torres. "Do you have rappelling gear?" "Always. What are you thinking?" "We're going to hoist your people up one at a time, starting with the most critically injured." For the next hour, Sarah coordinated the most complex rescue operation she'd ever been part of. The rescue helicopter hovered above them, fighting the wind and dust while lowering cables down into the canyon. One by one, the SEALs were lifted to safety. Sarah insisted on going up last, despite the increasing danger as her A-10's fuel began leaking from stress fractures in the tanks. The canyon was filling with aviation fuel vapors, and one spark could turn the whole area into an inferno. As the rescue cable lifted her out of the canyon, Sarah looked down at her A-10 for the last time. The aircraft had saved 8 lives today, but it would never fly again. Back at Nellis Air Force Base, word of Sarah's rescue had spread quickly. When the rescue helicopter landed, a crowd of personnel was waiting, but instead of cheers, Sarah was met by Colonel Reeves and 2 military police officers. "Captain Martinez, you're under arrest for disobeying direct orders and destroying government property," the colonel announced. As they led her away in handcuffs, Sarah heard someone in the crowd mutter, "She should have stayed in the kitchen, where she belongs." But she also heard Sergeant Torres calling after her, "Captain, you saved 8 lives today. Don't let them make you forget that." In her holding cell that night, Sarah wondered if saving those SEALs had been worth ending her career. She'd proven she could fly and fight with the best of them, but apparently that wasn't enough to earn their respect. What she didn't know was that the story of her rescue was already spreading far beyond Nellis Air Force Base, and the truth about what really happened in Devil's Canyon was about to change everything. Sarah sat in the small military courtroom, her dress uniform crisp despite the circumstances. 3 weeks had passed since her arrest, and the court-martial proceedings were not going well. The prosecutor, Major Williams, had painted her as a reckless pilot who endangered lives and destroyed valuable military equipment. Captain Martinez willfully disobeyed direct orders from her commanding officer. Major Williams told the panel of 5 officers serving as judges. She then proceeded to destroy a $30 million aircraft through reckless flying. This kind of insubordination cannot be tolerated in our military. Sarah's defense attorney, Captain Jennifer Hayes, had done her best, but the case seemed hopeless. The facts were clear. Sarah had disobeyed orders and crashed her aircraft. The reasons why didn't seem to matter to the panel. Colonel Reeves took the stand as the prosecution's star witness, his testimony damning. "Captain Martinez has always been headstrong," he said, not looking at Sarah. "She seems to feel the need to prove herself by taking unnecessary risks. This incident was the inevitable result of that attitude." Sarah felt each word like a physical blow. Her entire career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for was being destroyed in front of her. But then something unexpected happened. "Your Honor," a voice called from the back of the courtroom, "I request permission to address the court." Everyone turned to see Sergeant Torres standing in the gallery, still wearing his Navy dress uniform with several medical bandages visible. The presiding judge, General Patricia Adams, looked surprised. "Sergeant, this is highly irregular. You're not scheduled to testify." "Ma'am, I flew here from the hospital as soon as I was able. There are things this court needs to know about what really happened in that canyon." Major Williams objected, but General Adams overruled him. "I'll allow it. This court wants to hear all the facts." Torres walked to the witness stand, his movements still stiff from injuries sustained in the desert. As he was sworn in, Sarah noticed other people entering the courtroom, the rest of his SEAL team, all wearing their dress uniforms despite their various injuries. "Sergeant Torres," Captain Hayes began, "please tell the court what happened during the rescue operation." Torres looked directly at the panel of judges. "Your Honors, Captain Martinez didn't just save our lives. She risked everything to do it. When she found us in that canyon, we had 2 men with critical injuries who couldn't be moved. Standard rescue procedures would have taken hours. Hours those men didn't have." He paused, his voice growing stronger. "I've been a Navy SEAL for 15 years. I've worked with pilots from every branch of service. What Captain Martinez did that day was the most skilled, courageous flying I've ever witnessed." Major Williams stood up. "Objection. The witness is not qualified to judge flying skills." "Actually, Major, I am," Torres replied. "I'm also a licensed pilot with over 500 hours of flight time. What Captain Martinez accomplished, landing an A-10 in a narrow canyon during a dust storm with one engine failing, that's not reckless. That's miraculous," the courtroom murmured, and Sarah felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Captain Hayes continued her questioning. "Sergeant, what would have happened if Captain Martinez had followed orders and returned to base?" Torres didn't hesitate. "2 of my men would be dead, ma'am. Maybe more. The storm lasted another 6 hours after the rescue. By the time it cleared enough for normal rescue operations, it would have been too late." Then Torres did something that shocked everyone in the courtroom. He stood up and looked directly at Colonel Reeves. "Sir, with all due respect, you weren't there. You didn't see what we saw. You didn't watch Captain Martinez risk her life and her career to save 8 strangers. She's being punished for doing what every military officer swears to do, protect the lives of her fellow service members." One by one, the other SEALs stood up in the gallery, a silent show of support that sent a clear message to everyone present. General Adams called for a recess, and during the break, Captain Hayes pulled Sarah aside. "That was unexpected. Torres wasn't on any witness list." "He's risking his career, too," Sarah said quietly. "SEALs aren't supposed to get involved in Air Force politics." When court resumed, Captain Hayes called another surprise witness, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, Sarah's crew chief. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Hayes began, You've worked on A-10 aircraft for 18 years. In your expert opinion, was Captain Martinez's aircraft airworthy when she attempted the canyon landing? Rodriguez shook his head. No, ma'am. The engine telemetry shows the left engine was in complete failure. Most pilots would have ejected rather than attempt a landing. Why didn't Captain Martinez eject? Because ejecting would have meant abandoning those SEALs. The captain chose to risk her life rather than leave them behind. The prosecution tried to recover, calling several pilots to testify about proper procedures and chain of command, but their testimony seemed hollow compared to the raw emotion of the SEAL team's account. Captain Stevens took the stand, and Sarah braced herself for another attack on her abilities. But Stevens surprised her. Captain Martinez and I have had our differences, he admitted. I didn't think... Well, I had doubts about women in combat roles. But what she did in that canyon, that took skills and courage I'm not sure I possess. She made a judgment call that saved 8 lives, and she's being punished for it. Even Colonel Reeves seemed shaken by the testimony. When recalled to the stand, his voice was less certain. Colonel, Captain Hayes pressed, if you had been in Captain Martinez's position, what would you have done? Reeves was quiet for a long moment. I would have followed orders and returned to base. Even if it meant those SEALs would die. Following orders is fundamental to military discipline. But so is protecting the lives of fellow service members, isn't it, Colonel? The question hung in the air, and everyone in the courtroom understood its implications. During the lunch break, an unexpected visitor arrived at the courthouse. A reporter from the Washington Post who had heard about the case. She approached Torres outside the building. Sergeant, I understand you're speaking out for Captain Martinez. Can you tell me why this case is important? Torres looked back at the courthouse, then at the reporter. Ma'am, Captain Martinez is being court-martialed for being too good at her job. She's being punished for having the skill and courage to do what others couldn't. If we let this stand, what message does that send to every service member who might face a similar choice? The reporter's questions continued, and Torres found himself explaining not just what happened in the canyon, but the larger issues at stake. By the end of the interview, he'd painted a picture of institutional bias and a system that punished excellence when it came from unexpected sources. That afternoon, as the court-martial resumed, Sarah noticed more reporters in the gallery. Word was getting out, and the story was becoming bigger than just one pilot's career. But she also noticed something else. The panel of judges seemed to be listening more carefully now, asking their own questions instead of just following the prosecution's lead. General Adams in particular seemed troubled by what she was hearing. As the senior woman officer on the panel, she understood the challenges Sarah faced in ways the male officers might not. As the day's testimony ended, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since her arrest, but she also knew that the hardest part was still ahead. Convincing 5 military officers that sometimes breaking the rules was the right thing to do. The truth was finally coming out. But would it be enough to save her career?